insights. Next up on our agenda is Alan Evans. As I noted earlier, Alan is the founder and CEO of Helping Hands Reentry Outreach Centers. Helping Hands has multiple facilities in Oregon that provide shelter and individualized programs for hundreds of houseless individuals. His programs are remarkably successful at helping these individuals re-enter society and return to self-sufficiency. I'm pleased to virtually welcome Alan Evans to our stage. Alan, I hope our connection's working.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Just making sure, because I can't hear on the other end. My name is Alan Evans. I'm the founder and executive director of Helping Hands Reentry Outreach Centers. We're a data-driven, trauma-informed, person-centered approach to homeless reentry. We have low barrier shelter on the front end of our program with high barrier opportunities and programs for people to change their life. Little story about, and we serve 5 Oregon counties: Clatsop County, Yamhill County, Lincoln County, Tillamook County, and recently we just refurbished the Wapato jail that was built with $58 million worth of bond money, and it was never open. It sat empty for 18 years. It's 155,000 square feet, has emergency shelter, long-term reentry, medical facility, dental wing, nurseries, dog kennels, victory gardens, vocational training, and all of that good stuff that goes with the programs that we run. A little story about me. I was homeless for 27 years. When I was a kid, I lived through sexual abuse and physical abuse, was put in the hospital multiple times. I was hung by my father when I was 11 years old, and I was found by a neighbor, and I was put into the foster care system in California. As you can imagine, I was a pretty angry kid. I couldn't understand why I wasn't saved. I had a lot of internal questions. By the time I was 13 years old, I was a full-blown methamphetamine addict. I was running away, and I had a lot of stuff going on the inside. I lived through a ton of trauma. I've been homeless all over the United States, from Victorville, California, to Pensacola, Florida, New York, Chicago, Michigan, Seattle, the high desert in California, back there for a while, where after 27 years I ended up in Portland, Oregon. I lived under the Burnside Bridge for 4.5 months, and that was just over 21 years ago. I went to every door I could find, said, look, I'm broke, I'm homeless, I'm addicted, I don't want to live this way no more, I don't want to die, can you help me? And I couldn't get any help. I had the second coldest night I experienced in my life in Portland, Oregon, decided that was not the place for me, and me and 2 other guys decided we were going to run to the coast, because if you're going to be homeless in Oregon, why not be homeless on the beach? And that's what we did. We moved over there, and it was December 26th, and it was freezing outside. I was sleeping under a tarp in some bushes, and I walked to Astoria, Oregon from Gearhart, and I knocked on every door I could find asking for help. I tried to get food stamps. They told me that I needed identification. I tried to get identification. They told me I needed a residence. I wanted a residence, but I had no money. And I realized at that moment in my life that crime was a win-win situation. That if I committed a crime, I can continue my drug abuse and saving my life in that form with self-medication. But if I got arrested, I'd get 3 meals and a bed in jail. So getting arrested became getting rescued. I was at the end of my rope, and I didn't want to live anymore, and I didn't want to die all at the same time. So I decided to commit a crime just to get arrested. And I did. I got arrested, and I got taken to the Seaside Police Department, where they called in the narcotics task force leader at that time, named Mark Whistler, Sergeant Mark Whistler, and he came in, and he sat down, and he said, tell me your story. I told him my story. He said, you know, you're not a bad guy. You're just sick. You're broken. So him and 2 other police officers wrapped the services around me I needed. They got me into a small home in Seaside, Oregon, where they gave me a corner of a living room. I got clean and sober. I went to meetings. I changed my life. There was compassion and accountability in this place. And I saved up some money and I went back to them and I said, I want to start a program. I want to help other people who come from the same place I come from. And so they did. So four or five police officers and 5 recovering addicts, we got together and we created a 501c3 and we opened up a facility in Seaside, Oregon that was served 9 men. One facility, we started working with people that were getting out of jail. And when we opened up our doors, we couldn't believe it. The place filled up in about 30 days. And in 6 months, we were housing 67 men, women, and children. You see, people truly want to get off the streets. They truly want to change their life. And I don't think we see that when we look around what's happening. My story made headline news. As a matter of fact, on a national headline news, because I got arrested specifically to get help. And they started doing stories on our program. And then we got asked by Yamhill County if we would bring our program there. If we advanced to Lincoln County and we bring our program there. We started working with offender reentry. And in those days, the streets were full of guys like me. You know, the bottom end drug addicts, the people who just were running and running and running. We were having success for about 6 or 7 years. We got contracts with corrections. We had these programs put together to hold people accountable, plus be compassionate. And about 2009, what was happening back then was people were coming in, they were getting on their feet, they would go down, they'd get an apartment, but in 6 months they were recidivating back to our doors. And we could not understand why. People had all the tools that they needed, but they needed so much more than we were capable of offering at that time. And so in 2009, we see this crash in the market, and we started to see housing become less available. It was less feasible. It was more than people could afford, and senior citizens started showing up at our doors, and mothers with children started showing up at our doors. And we realized at that time that the face of homelessness was changing. It wasn't just the guys in the street like me anymore. It was people who were getting pushed out of the system into the same environment with everybody else. And it was pretty dramatic. And about that time, I was trying to become an adoptive parent in the state of Oregon, actually a foster parent in the state of Oregon. I became the first foster parent in the state of Oregon with a criminal history. The first adoptive parent in the state of Oregon. I wanted to serve kids. I wanted to help children that come from the same place I did. And I adopted a boy named Eli. Eli came to us from Texas. He couldn't read or write. He was in the 3rd grade. We took him to Gearhart Elementary School. He never went to school a day in his life. And when we took him to Gearhart Elementary School, they did an IEP. An IEP is an individual education plan. You see, they evaluated the obstacles Eli faced to re-enter to read and write at grade level. And sitting around this table was a person that could help him read, and a person that could help him write, a person that could help him with mental health issues, a tutor, a counselor. There were 7 people sitting around this table. And I had this epiphany. You know, if Eli would have had to go down the street to learn to read, down the street to learn to write, down the street to get help for mental health issues, down the street to get tutored, this kid never would have made it. Well, he graduated 4 years ago, by the way, and he's buying a home. He's a good kid. But that concept that day, and they also did an ACEs survey on him, where they learned about the trauma that he lived through. And they put this plan together to help him, and within a year, he was reading and writing at grade level because they brought all the resources to this kid. And we realized at that time that we had some work to do. We went back to the drawing board. We started to believe that we do full evaluations on people, and we find out their demographics, their basic needs, and the obstacles they face to reenter society, that we could tailor individual reentry plans based off of the knowledge that we gain from them on their story when they come through the door. And it was an immediate game changer for us. People started feeling heard, started feeling invested in and listened to. And we started to do all this, and we did it all on paper. We would do these paper interviews when people would come in, we get all that information, we scan it into a computer, and we send it to our district office, and that's where we kept all the files, and our case managers would have to dig through them, and we thought we were just the cat's meow. And then I get this Facebook message from my brother, Wayne, who escaped a violent situation when we were kids, and he said, hey, I'd like to meet you. And we got together in Moncton, Oregon, as a matter of fact, and we were doing a little fly fishing and chatting there, and I was telling him about this program we were running, and he said, do you know what I do? And I said, I don't. He said, I work for Dell. I run the data control centers on a global level. We create databases that track things for shopping networks like Amazon and eBay, what's hot, what's not. I said, what are the chances of putting me in a room with your team to see if we can build a database that will allow us to gather the information from people, and we could tailor programs together for people off of the data we gather coming in the door. We went live with our system 7 years ago, and it was an immediate game changer. You see, we started to gather information from people that we never got to see before. When you drive down the street, you don't see their stories. But when people feel heard, changes begin to happen. Now, our organization has been extremely successful over the last 20 years of providing services. We have 12 facilities in 5 Oregon counties. And one day I get a call from Senator Betsy Johnson, and she says, I got this guy tearing this building down in Portland. Would you be interested in the kitchen equipment? And I said, well, we've got a couple large kitchens in some of our bigger facilities where we provide culinary arts training. Absolutely. Drove to Portland, drove past about 500 homeless people who come into the parking lot of this 155,000 square foot, $58 million jail that was never used, and I couldn't for the life of me understand why there was a facility there, and there was that problem out there. Needless to say, we struck a deal on it, and Jordan Schnitzer purchased the building, gave it to us for $1. And now it houses 318 people for reentry. What I can tell you is, over the years, we ran low barrier shelters for about 12 years. Low barrier shelters are extremely hard to run, especially because when you house people that have no money, with no money, it's difficult to provide those services. So social service agencies or nonprofits like ours are always strapped to run a program like that. It can be done without compassion and accountability. It has to be managed properly, and it has to be overseen a certain way. But more importantly, people need to be invested in. They need to be invested. People want an opportunity to change. They don't know how to do it. And if they're not taught and invested in, then I can tell you from experience, I stayed in the same place for nearly 27 years. We got offered an opportunity to run some safe risk villages that were put up by the city of Portland. The city of Portland got a certain amount of money to build these safe risk villages and put them in place into neighborhoods. They ran under, I believe, House Bill 2006, which says that you can pop these things up anywhere. And the neighbors in these neighborhoods did not really truly have a voice in it. They didn't feel heard. And then when we started to learn a little bit more, they asked us if we'd be willing to run one the same way that we ran our program, and we said yes, we would. But eventually we found out that they were utilized for high-impact camps, to move from high-impact camps where there was heavy drug abuse and violence and all of these things. They could move a person from camping into these facilities. And then we would have no say-so on who we could help and who we couldn't help. We decided at that time there were 2 things that we needed to look at. One is, anytime that we open an organization anywhere, we want to make sure that the community members around us are safe, that it's managed properly so there's not a threat to the people around it. And that's the reason we pulled out of those safe rest villages, is because we didn't believe that we could run an adequate program to keep a neighborhood safe. Now, I've lived in shelters all over the United States, and I'll tell you, if you have a low barrier shelter put together without proper management, problems happen. They just do. So that's my story. I wanted to share it with you guys, to give you my perspective. I've looked at this problem from the bottom up my whole life. I provide services all over the state. And those are some of the lessons I've learned along the way. Getting arrested should not become getting arrested. But compassion and accountability have to go hand in hand when we want to serve the houseless in our communities. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Alan, for sharing your story and your valuable insights. So now that we better understand some of the implications of the proposed code changes and have some real-world insights into the challenges that the city and the county are working to address, let's go ahead and get started with our panel discussion. So we're going to begin tonight's discussion with a topic that's on the minds of many folks. That being the code proposal allowing low-barrier shelters in neighborhoods. Although the public has great empathy and compassion for those who find themselves in a houseless situation, there's been broad public opposition to low-barrier shelters, specifically tents and RVs. The fact that those could be sited in residential neighborhoods and on school and park property. The proposed shelter code still allows for this to take place with a limitation. They must be on sites that have a public or institutional purpose. It's clear that the city of Bend does not have complete community buy-in at this point in time with regards to the placement of these types of shelters. So we're starting with the elephant in the room here, and I'm going to ask Councilor Perkins, do you support outdoor shelters, including tents and RVs on school and park property or other public property in residential neighborhoods?
Thank you. Excuse me, my allergies are acting up. I apologize if I'm hoarse. What do I support? I support Veterans Village, which is the definition of an outdoor shelter under these code changes. I support Central Oregon Villages and their proposal for a senior woman tiny home community, which is the definition of an outdoor shelter under these code changes. I support Oasis Village, which will not be in Bend, but Commissioner Dara talks a lot about this. That is also the definition of an outdoor shelter under these code changes. I'd also like to talk a little bit about what an outdoor shelter is and what it isn't. You know, outdoor shelters, the way we are talking about these in these code changes, they're not Hummel Road, they are not 2nd Street. Outdoor shelters have to have clear standards for management, good neighbor agreements, trash receptacles, bathrooms, secure storage, outreach and communication to adjacent neighbors prior to occupancy, and more. They will not be the unsanctioned camps that you see around our city. And I'd also like to clear up one more thing. As far as sort of talking about them being on school or park property, you know, these code changes, they do not force development. It will be up to the park district or the school district or the property owner if they want to develop the property, as long as they do it under the standards of these code changes. We will not be forcing, you know, Caldera to have a camp in their parking lot. That is not something that these code changes do. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Well, thank you. Could you clarify one thing? So, for instance, let's say there's a plan to site a camp on a park in my neighborhood, and it's owned by Bend Parks and Rec. What would be the process? Would the city go to Bend Parks and Rec, or the service provider go to Bend Parks and Rec and say, okay, we want to put a park on this property, this public property, and Bend Parks and Rec would make that decision?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what you're saying. You're saying where would it originate from? It would have to originate from the property owner. So if it's on a park, it would have to originate from Parks and Rec.
So the request to put a camp on that property, say owned by Parks and Rec, that request would come from Bend Parks and Rec, or would it come from a service provider that is proposing to put it on that property?
Well, let's say Parks and Rec decided that they wanted to have a camp. They would probably be working with the service provider because they don't provide those services as Parks and Rec, right? That's not in their job description.
Okay,
That's what you're asking.
yeah, just the way I'm understanding it, Dan, it's not something that the city says, it's not something the city council or some staff office in the city says, we want to put it in that park. It would be instigated by either a church or Ben Parks and Rec, something like that.
Yes.
Okay, just want to understand that. So I'm going to actually, on this topic, ask a question of Alan. Based on your personal experience and professional expertise, what are your thoughts on placing outdoor low-barrier shelters in residential neighborhoods and on school and park property?
Well, it can be tough. I know from experience that it's difficult to manage low barrier shelters. It just is. Service providers would have to, provide a good service, and if it's unsanctioned or if it's not overseen properly, it could cause problems for the neighborhood.
So it really comes down to the management.
It does come down to the management, and in most cases, the city's not managing, the county is hiring providers to manage low barrier facilities with strict guidelines on what low barrier means with the housing first concept, attached to that. It can be extremely difficult to impose, to create rules that provide safety, and it's really hard to provide a good neighbor agreement with a community, with a neighborhood, if you can't have management oversight. It can be extremely difficult, and it does matter who the provider is. There are good providers out there. There's a lot of good agencies that provide a decent service, but it all depends on management.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Commissioner Adair, given the county's plans for the establishment of something Megan just mentioned, which is the Oasis Low Barrier Shelter in Redmond by the airport, do you think that this is a better solution than siting outdoor low barrier shelters in residential neighborhoods? Because it's outside of I'll call it the inner city a little bit more.
Yes, it is outside the inner city of Redmond, but it is in the UGB. It's actually part of 10 acres that we thought were important to help the homeless issue in Deschutes County. The Oasis Village is low barrier. It can have up to 30 to perhaps maybe 45, 50 residents there, but it will have 24/7 security. I do believe that's important, and if you want me to add, the mayor of Redmond is expanding the potential of the other 8 acres for RVs. Right now, they're working on all the logistics to bring those out. The gravel, we did get funding from the state over bringing in the utilities, which was $350,000 because we have to bring water in. And then one of my theories, because we have such a danger in Deschutes County with fires, in our various homeless camps, that I really want them to surround the property by a sprinkler system that can be turned on and tested weekly. I just feel that's really important. And when you're dealing with 10 acres, I do believe that that's something that could be cost effectively done. But Mayor Endicott is excited about this. What I like about it, it's not right in town, and yet we've got to be respectful because we are by the airport, and I don't know if you remember, but a couple years ago we did have a fire in that area, and but it's truly going to be cleaned up, and the county commissioners have told Mayor Endicott is that it's got to be 24/7. I appreciate what Alan's been saying. Security is incredibly important. It's important for our community. It's not quite in town, but we have in Deschutes County an amazing capacity for the bus system, for people that are out there that only have a bicycle and they want to, take the bus, we can actually implement a bus route for that neighborhood into the city of Redmond. And, there's a bus stop right down the road, probably, I don't know, a couple miles. So I truly believe it's a good opportunity for the county to work with the city of Redmond over the property.
Thank you. What is the forecast for when those, say, 30 units would be available? I mean, is it a year? Is it 2 years?
Oh, no. Well, after working on the Veterans Village, I learned that it took longer than I thought, but they've already built the first tiny home. They're going to take that around to the community. There is an incredible collaboration in the city of Redmond. I believe it's about 15 churches are part of the Jericho Road program, and so they're going to take it around, get underwriting and sponsors for the different little trailers that are being built, and then the other 8 acres will be RV parking. But they're planning on going ahead with that as quickly as possible. The Oasis Village may take maybe 8 months or something, but I'm hoping it could be possibly sooner. But I know that the RV parking is going to be amazingly quick government in action.
Great. It's going to be sooner rather than later.
I hope so. Yes.
Okay. A key concern of the public is security at the low barrier shelters, as we've been talking about, and that's particularly at the outdoor shelters. So drilling down in a bit more detail, let's talk about another provision that we've touched on already. The shelter code gives the service provider the discretion to choose between on-site or on-call management. And again, on-call management means that there is no requirement for 24/7 on-site management at the shelter, and a shelter operation manager can be on call at a remote location when a resident or a neighbor believes that there's a problem or an issue that needs to be dealt with. So again, I'm going to go to Alan, based on your expertise, your experience. Do you believe 24/7 on-site shelter management at low barrier shelters is warranted, and if so, why?
Well, we tried it without it before when we ran a low barrier shelter, and it just doesn't work. Management is extremely important. For one, to have a public safety measure in place, to have good neighbor agreements in place. I can tell you, when I was out there and staying in low barrier shelters, unmanaged, we're going to cause problems. It has to be overseen 24/7.
Okay, thanks.